I guess just want to start off just asking if anybody had any questions from Monday. Sorry, I was kind of rapid fire mode trying to get through a whole lot in a little bit of time. So anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? I think I've got the quiz for this week up and open. I'll double check that after we finish with class this morning. We'll start off this morning talking a little bit about, in more detail and context, or a little bit more anyway, about these issues that we face, challenges in plant science and agriculture, which, of course, are changing all the time. I think we probably have more challenges now than ever, but I like to think that with challenge comes opportunity. So don't necessarily get too down about it. For instance, we were talking about the whole issues with COVID-19, and it has definitely created a lot of challenges, but in some cases it has been, I hate to say that it's good for anything, but it's been fairly good for some operations in terms of especially the horticulture type operations where we are, kind of reliant on people to work in their home gardens, for instance. A lot of the nurseries were selling out of plants. Our plant sales at the community college sold out completely. There's two sides to every coin, and I think that there are some good things about it. So anyway, with challenge comes opportunity. It's just all about how we adapt to it. So starting on that note, let me go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint. Now, do you guys see the slideshow? Okay. Just got to double check and make sure. So actually I need to re-upload this because I changed it a little bit from the one that was uploaded on the Canvas site. I'll just note that I will try to always put up the PowerPoint lectures in addition to what we discuss in class into our recorded lecture. That way you guys can download them. I'll also try to put up a slide sheet ahead of time so you can take notes on it if you want to. Anyway, let's get into this in a little bit more detail and talking about some of these big issues. There's a question on the quiz it's an essay question about what do you think is the biggest challenge for agriculture? And one of the most common answers that we've had in the past was overpopulation, and also the issues associated with land use due to overpopulation. And also I would like to kind of use this as an opportunity to a springboard to generate some discussion. So if you all have anything to say about it at any point, just it's open. It's an open class here, so feel free to talk about any of this and what you think are the biggest challenges, because they could be different in Keysville and Alberta than they are in Abingdon, and of course around the world. So I think overpopulation is one of the biggest issues, and just looking at the facts here, what they're saying, what the population scientists are saying now is that they expect that global population to rise from around 7.5 billion people now to about 10 billion people by 2050, which it seems like we've got some time, right, before it increases that much. And I feel like when you get numbers this large, it seems like it's somewhat trivial. But in 30 years, we'll have 2.5 billion more mouths to feed. Of course, that's just a projection. That could definitely change, especially in the age of this global pandemic. But I think the big thing to outline here is that we have gotten better at keeping people alive, basically. So the average lifespan has increased. We're close to 80 years in the U.S. is the average lifespan. And I think as a result, we're not slowing down in having more kids. So we're always increasing this global population. There are more people born than die, which means that we're always going to have more mouths to feed. That might not seem like a huge issue in and of itself, but when you think about how most of the arable land, the land that we use for agriculture, and arable, I think, is kind of a loaded term in some ways, because we think of arable as being land that is actually like plowable, workable land. And of course, we can do different types of agriculture on land that might not be plowable. Of course, livestock, using livestock on steeper land. Here in the mountainous Southwest Virginia, there's lots of steep land that is used for some sort of agricultural purpose. So that's not really included in that arable land figure. But either way, most of the good agriculture land around the world is already in use. Personally, I think that land is one of the best investments that you can make because they're not making any more of it, right? Well, then again, I guess in some places they actually are making more land. Talk about building on and building new islands, especially in the Middle East, and I think Dubai, they have the largest human-built island there. So either way, they're not really making new agricultural land. Along with this rise in population comes an increased demand for the luxury crops, those that are kind of converting from say beans to beef. We'll think of that kind of more as that affluence issue and this increase in that luxury crop. Along with that increase in that crop, where people want to eat better, is also an increase in energy and the embedded energy that it takes to produce that crop. So another big issue associated with overpopulation, political instability associated with the availability of or inavailability of resources. And again, you would think here in the 21st century, we've got to the point where we don't have to fight for, food and water and oil, but we do, right? We've constantly been involved in some sort of military conflict. Gosh, I don't know when the last time we weren't. But that's not just us, it's happening all around the world. And often it is associated with some sort of resource, whether that's oil or fossil fuels or water, which I think water is going to be one of the biggest issues going forth. So what do y'all think? Anything to add there or take away from the overpopulation and land use issues? Can we get a show of hands? Who thinks that that's the biggest issue that we face? Richard thinks it's the biggest. It's definitely a huge issue. So another one which we talked about a little bit last week, just the whole issue of farm income and finances. So we know that it's not very easy to make it in the world of agriculture, unfortunately. You have to be creative to make money from the farm. Most of our farmers, at least in our part of the state, are full-time farmers, sometimes with also full-time jobs. You guys probably kind of nodding your head there, kind of thinking about that for maybe your families, or either way, there has to be an adjustment in this whole concept of farm income and finances. Um, just looking at that figure from that VDAX brochure, the farmer and the average farmer in Virginia often only gets about 15 cents out of every dollar, 15% of every food dollar spent. That's got to change, right? We put in a lot more than 15% of the work. So in the US, we have trends in the agriculture world that are going for higher debt on the farm scale and lower amounts of working capital. And I think that is also kind of related to that kind of whole get big or get out attitude. You have to get a loan to get a piece of equipment just to keep the farm running. So anyway, that's an issue in the US and in other parts of the world as well. Of course, we have one of, if not the most advanced agriculture system in the world. So we have a lot of technology, and as this new technology develops, there, comes more of an interest in, using this new technology. And of course that costs money. So the stocks and futures, which admittedly I don't have as much knowledge about as I would like to, but I really kind of think about the whole stocks and futures as kind of gambling, legal gambling with people's lives in some cases. It's kind of unpredictable how the stock market will react to really anything, whether it's a change in policy or politics or supply and demand. So that's something to look at. And I've known a handful of really successful farmers that really look at the futures markets, especially in terms of trading cattle. So they're looking at like the price of corn, for instance, as the kind of project when they might buy or sell cattle. So that's an important thing to look at, and it's not something we discuss a whole lot in this class, but I think it's really important to get a grasp on it.
I spend a day or two talking about them in the marketing class, so 2/3 of the way through the semester, you'll learn more than you want to know.
I need to take that class myself, Tom.
Might scare you. I know the teacher, he's a weirdo.
As we've seen this year, the supply chain issues, that's not just because of COVID-19. We talked a little bit about that last week and how it's not necessarily just us being involved with the supply chain, but also how the supply chain affects us, how we might get specific tools or products that help us to package our products. A lot of that stuff comes from China, and of course China pretty much completely shut down pretty early on in the pandemic. Of course it was coming from there. So anyway, I think the whole COVID-19 thing it just outlines how really we need to kind of look at maybe changing the paradigm of this centralized system that we have. The issue with the centralized system is that it's really easy to break that backbone, right? Think of the backbone like a vertebrae, your spine. If one vertebrae breaks, then the whole thing doesn't work. So that's kind of how I think of the centralized food system. And really what we need is a spine in every, corner of the country, every multiple supply chains, more supply chains, and less of a reliance on, one thing. It all kind of goes into this whole idea of adaptability. And also just think that the farmer really is a Renaissance man / woman. We are not just growing produce, right? We have to also be business people. We have to be carpenters. We have to be mechanics. We have to be artists in some ways. So that, I think, it places a whole lot of importance on the job of, growing and producing crops. But that's not always matched with the money that is in the bank. I'll put up some links to successful farmers. Those that I think have done a really good job. I mean, there are definitely people out there that have figured out how to generate six figures off of sometimes small amounts of acreage. So we really need to look at these success stories and use those as examples to learn from, not necessarily just to copy, but really to learn from. So anything there anybody wants to add or take away there on the farm income and finances? Anybody have any stories associated with that, good or bad? What crops do y'all make money off of?
Well, you and I had talked about how my family grew tobacco for a really long time in Abington, and finally the prices just got so low that it didn't even make financial sense for my family to grow tobacco anymore. So they just started leasing all their land to larger operations that were able to offset the cost of how low tobacco is with just the sheer amount of tobacco they grew.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one to look at. Thank you for adding that. The whole tobacco issue, I mean, that was our number one cash crop for, centuries pretty much in Virginia. And as we saw looking at VDEX brochure, it is now what is like number 10 or 12. And I think that's kind of related also to the next big challenge and issue. I feel like I might have cut you off there. Is there anything else you wanted to add to
that? Not really. It just, like I said, it was just didn't make financial sense anymore. And tobacco in and of itself is just kind of a dying thing. More people are becoming health conscious and not smoking as much, and everyone's going to those big products and all that type of stuff. So in general, tobacco is just a dying thing, and eventually, I think probably in 10 years, you'll probably see half the tobacco farmers you do now, just because of those e-cigarettes.
Yeah, that's another thing there. The changes in technology, which I'll try to circle back around. I've got something to add to that when we start talking about some of the potential solutions there to some of these challenges. Anybody else have anything there on farm income and finances? Who knows some really successful farmers in terms of the money market?
My grandpa he was successful with tobacco, kind of like Ben's story. Her name's Ben.
No,
James. Kind of like James's story, and then he started leasing his land out to other people.
Yeah, so maybe changing the way you operate. Are they making money off of leasing the land?
Yeah, for the most part.
In some places, it seems like it really, I guess it depends on how good the land and how productive the land is for whatever you're leasing it for. But in some cases, people are leasing land just to pay the taxes on it.
That's what we're doing on our farm.
Yeah. And it's maybe not ideal, but hey, you got to pay those taxes. That's probably what you have to at least get that bottom line, right?
Yeah, we cover taxes and some basic maintenance, like gravel on the driveway and stuff like that. That's about it.
Yeah. Well, let's. I hate to be talking about such depressing things here first thing in the morning, but again, with these challenges, I think there are opportunities, and hopefully we'll spend the second half of the class really talking about those opportunities. But to continue on just for a moment here about the challenges. Here's one again that I really don't have much of a grasp on: the policies and politics. And I think this also outlines how we really have to not try to look at everything as black or white, but try to see the gray area. And because really it's all of these issues are not black or white. I feel like there are two sides to the coin, but there's a whole lot of dollars to think about too. So on the policies and politics, first thinking about the food safety issues, and along with those, the good agricultural practices, the gaps associated with those, and the regulations around them. Yeah, there's a whole lot there to unpack. We know, again, I think in a centralized food system and supply system that it's really easy to have food safety problems when you never talk to the people that the food came from in the first place. It becomes more difficult to track, and that's where gaps come from, where the good agricultural practices. And we've been saying it for years. It's not quite there yet, but if you're growing food, then you're going to have to, basically submit to these gaps, these regulations related to food safety. And we'll talk about this in more detail later on. But food poisoning, right? We always see these issues with recalls from E. coli or salmonella. Different things that cause that. Some of it is cultural, some of it is just contamination somewhere along the supply chain. Either way, these regulations aren't going away. In many cases, they're actually getting worse. And I think that isn't really related necessarily to the politics. It's not really a Democrat or Republican or independent issue. It's just a food safety issue. So we don't really talk about rolling back regulations in food. Now, there are other regulations, especially the environmental regulations, that probably do change more as a result of the politics, which personally I try to stay out of. I should probably get more into it, though, thinking about it, because it is a huge challenge and it does have massive effects on our agriculture. Along with that, the labor issues associated with human migration. The whole idea of migrant workers, it's not a new thing. It's been around for as long as agriculture has been around. We have people that do a particular job very well, and they move with the harvest often. So there are lots of issues associated with that, though, especially with COVID-19. Saw some of those news blurbs about how the whole troop of farm workers was infected with COVID-19 because they're working in close quarters, harvesting and trying to move produce. In some cases, that shut down farms this year. So something to think about. The trade wars and tariffs, again, kind of both ways here. I think that China did become a huge importer for our goods, probably because they don't have enough land to grow it all for their massive population. So there's definitely those situations where I think that we were being taken advantage of, and there are issues where we needed to put tariffs on some of their goods that we import. The whole trade issue it creates more challenges for agriculture if you are an exporter of goods. In some cases, I think it probably really hurt farmers. In some cases, it helped farmers. So along with that, on the policies and politics, with the trade wars, with the labor issues, with the food safety and regulations, and with everything we've been talking about, we just have a disconnect in public perception. The average American probably doesn't really, care about that much where their food comes from or where this particular good comes from. And they don't have any idea how much work, how much resources go into, production. So because of this disconnect of public perception, we see sometimes just silly news stories. Finally, on that policy front, the get big or get out attitude, which I think has kind of led to kind of more of an industrialized system and more of a centralized system, which I'm not going to say is necessarily a bad thing all the time, but it creates challenges for smaller scale farmers. All right, so that's a whole lot there to think about, and really probably just scratching the surface on the policies and politics, but probably the only time I'll ask if you all want to discuss politics in the class, but anybody have anything to add or take away on the policies and politics front? Nobody? I'm kind of surprised there. James, you look like you're going to say something.
I don't know if it technically, I guess it kind of ties into politics a little bit, but my girlfriend's getting ready to graduate with a degree. She's doing student teaching right now. And one of the things we talked about is even where I grew up in Amelia County, which is a really agriculturally rich place, 2 stoplights, small farming town. And we did have ag classes, but I think one of the biggest issues, even over land use and everything else with agriculture, is that simply put, children growing up just don't even understand that they could grow up to be a farmer or even go to school to do agriculture. And I think that's one of the worst things is that less and less every year you have people going to school and becoming farmers, and that's why the trend turns to the average farmer being in their 50s or 60s, and especially around us. I mean, most of the people that are farming are like our grandparents, and I think that's like one of the issues that ties in with politics is that less and less in school, there's less and less funding for agriculture programs and ag teachers to actually teach. And the little bit they do get to teach is more like in the shop and stuff like that. And every year I feel like the FFA is less and less in the school systems. So I think that really ties into politics and one of the biggest issues for farming.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. It's really depressing to see that, again, with that public perception. I think that the public perception is that farming isn't something you can make money on, so don't do it. And I think a lot of times in the school system we're probably we have a lack of education on agriculture, which I think from day one, in kindergarten, you should be growing food, I think. Fortunately, I did have a kindergarten teacher that had us, germinating seeds, but, we didn't have a garden or anything like that. And of course, I went through the public school system in Bristol, which is, slightly more urban. We still have it's very rural, but we have the interstate coming through, so it's slightly more urban. And I didn't even know that I didn't know what horticulture was until I was a senior in high school. We didn't have any hort or ag programs in Bristol, Virginia public schools. They do now, fortunately. They have a horticulture program. They don't have any ag. So yeah, absolutely, James. It's a huge issue, and probably why that public perception exists. My grandparents on both sides of the family were subsistence farmers. They traded pretty much everything they had, and when the Great Depression, they were very young, but they lived through part of the Great Depression, and they didn't know that it was happening because they traded for everything. I think because of that, my parents' generation, they weren't really involved in agriculture as much. So even that just one generation, span is enough to completely change that system and the attitude around farming. So we got to change that. Anybody else have something to add there on policies and politics?
What was the lady? She's a member of Congress, and she did she did a couple of videos like a year ago. She was like in her apartment or whatever. She like planted a couple of vegetables or something out on her terrace or something. And she's like, "Oh wow, I didn't know they came out of the ground. This is so cool." I mean, she had absolutely no clue. She just thought the vegetables just naturally showed up somehow in a grocery store, and she's in Congress. My wife showed me those videos, and we were just horrified.
Yeah, we need more people involved in the political system that actually know something about agriculture. I've kind of, in my travels, been around the country and have had the fortune of being able to do some workshops in different parts of the country, and everywhere, even here in Southwest Virginia, I found that, yeah, kids don't know where the food comes from. They think that it comes from the grocery store, that the farm is maybe in the back there or something. It doesn't make sense. And again, that's got to change. I think from the very beginning, we need to have some strong education in where our food comes from, because it's the most important, connection we have with the land. All right. Here's another big issue. All of the environmental issues, the kind of long-term issues of climate, and the changes with climate, and also the short-term, the weather issues, which there's no way to predict what's going to happen on the weather front, or kind of the long-term climate front. Is it going to get warmer? Is it going to get colder? Are we going to have a very harsh winter, or is it going to be a mild winter? Are we going to have, like a few years back, forest fires in Gatlinburg, Tennessee? This all, I mean, there's part of it that is, of course, the natural cycle, but unpredictable natural cycle, right? The El Nino and La Nina, but also, just the other issues associated with that. I think that's another thing, add to our list of what you need to be as a farmer. You got to be somewhat a meteorologist, especially if you're growing hay, right? Make hay while the sun shines, but you better get it up before it rains. So just a few things here. Agriculture occupies about 40% of the world's surface, far more than any other land use. And we're using about 70% of the world's fresh water. A good portion of that is actually going to, I guess, ornamental horticulture, lawns, especially in drier parts of the country and world. But still, we use a lot of irrigation water too for crops. We contribute in agriculture, they say, about 11% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Even though we contribute only 11%, which I'm not saying that's a small figure, but it seems like we get like 80% of the flack on it. I will say on the other side of this coin here that, greenhouse gas emissions, which again, we have no idea really how that affects the climate. All of the studies out there, I think, are really just best guesses. The issue, though, with the greenhouse gases that I think that people don't look at is that we're also positioned in agriculture to have the greatest effect on that. We can actually be a sink for these greenhouse gas emissions. Land clearing, deforestation, so we can practice agriculture. a resulting loss of biodiversity. Just have to say here that on the biodiversity front, you know, sometimes we're like, why does that even matter anyway? But in my opinion, I think that there is a cure for everything out there, you know, somewhere. And we've actually identified about half of the plant species that we think are on the planet. So there's another, you know, couple of 100,000 species of plants out there that could have potential to carry maybe a cure for cancer. So I think preserving that biodiversity is important for us as well as just the sake of the organisms themselves and the web of ecology. I already mentioned, you know, talking about the climate change, we'll just gloss over that. The short-term weather trends, though, how often has it been, you know, too hot or too dry or too wet? You know, it's very rarely is it that kind of Goldilocks, you know, just right. So we don't know how, you know, climate and weather is affected by what we do on really on any scale. We can kind of look at it on the microclimate scale, but either way, it's a big issue. It's a challenge that we have to try to come to terms with. Another big one that we'll talk about in greater detail is just the idea of the erosion of soil, the loss of topsoil, which we talked about the Dust Bowl being a big issue. That was really the first time we started to look at soil erosion. And we had a whole, you know, branch of the USDA developed as a result of that loss of topsoil in the Midwest. All right, anybody have anything to say there about environment, climate change, weather? There's a lot we could talk about there. We could have a whole class probably devoted to any of these challenges for agriculture, whether it's this year or you know, far beyond. How's the weather been for you all this year? Has it been conducive to your production or your family's production?
It was too dry in the summertime, and now it's pretty much gotten too wet to do anything. So
Yeah, I've seen that quite a few times in the past few years where we get a lot of moisture in the spring and it's very difficult to get out there and work the soil. So you can't get crops out. And then it becomes too dry and then it becomes too wet again. So moisture is a big deal for sure. All right. So let's talk about trying to meet these challenges. And of course, we're just scratching the surface. We're not going to get into really much specific answers to these questions and solutions, but I think it's important to think about these challenges, keep them in the back of your mind, and especially as you approach your crop project, you know, what are the challenges with that particular crop and how could they be overcome? One of the big ways is through genetics. Whether that's kind of traditional breeding, and we think of traditional breeding here as kind of being out in the field and just doing, you know, regular cross-pollination type breeding. But also under traditional breeding, we also consider mutagenesis, which is using chemicals and or radiation, which I know seems very unnatural and very unconventional, but it's something we've been doing a very long time to induce mutations in crops that then we can try to propagate and reproduce to get some desirable traits. We wouldn't have seedless watermelons without mutagenesis. Protoplast fusion, we also think of, it's kind of under that guise of traditional breeding. This is involved in tissue culture, which we'll talk about in the propagation world. But there is some breeding you can do in lab that is not genetic engineering, which I think on that, let me mark that out. We're going to call that genetic engineering. Transgenesis, which is using basically a gene from a totally different plant, or in some cases an animal, to put that. They usually use a bacteria to carry these snippets of DNA and move it into a new plant. Can only be done in a lab, of course. And then intragenesis is kind of that same concept, except you're using the same organism. In the past few years, we've seen a lot more attention on actual gene editing, which CRISPR, we can talk about that if you're interested in it later, but basically it's a way to make more precise changes to the genome. It's like genetic engineering, except more precise, basically. And so what I'm looking at here in terms of using genetics as a way to meet some of these challenges is that we have a lot of potential there, whether through traditional breeding or genetic engineering, to make our crops better able to withstand changes in weather and climate, and also better use nutrients in the soil, withstand drought. I could go on and on. Disease resistance. A lot of that is in the gene pool, and that's why on Monday I talked a lot about placing an emphasis on the centers of origin of plants and their centers of diversity. All right, so that's a big one, genetics. Another way we look at it is through technology, which, a few decades ago, we didn't have the ability to have, GPS guided tractors. So now we do. So that there's one that's really worked out, and I think a lot of people make use of. Even just implements, new technology for machinery that we might use. But a couple of things I just want to point out that are kind of, I think, new, but not necessarily really accepted very well yet. Precision agriculture, where we're basically using data to better inform our decisions on the farm. Computers, the digital age, right? Also looking at more of the kind of horticultural type growing, more intensive growing. So just throwing in here the idea of like aquaponics and all the other ponics too, aeroponics, hydroponics. That technology is greatly improved. I like the idea of aquaponics. I don't see it really practiced a whole lot, at least here. But combining basically the production of an aquatic organism like fish with kind of a production of a plant crop too. Also, the artificial systems, we're seeing more growing in these cargo containers, the shipping containers. People are using those to actually develop artificial climates and grow crops in, especially in urban areas. And these things, I think, are just getting more crop on a smaller piece of land, and also maybe creating more jobs in the process. The other one here, the UAS, unmanned aerial systems, the drone technology. It's not really, again, it's not something that is being practiced a lot yet, but it's starting to, I guess, breach. Mostly for data gathering, but we actually have a sprayer drone at the community college that we can't even use because the FAA is starting to implement rules on that. Basically being more precise about how we're practicing agriculture on that front. The drone technology is it's pretty neat, and it's being applied in all kinds of different ways. I think you really can't take the human aspect out of it, but it's something important to look at, and for you all, consider go out there and getting your UAS license. All right. So all of this kind of gets into a very general sense, and I'm going to kind of go over this next part somewhat quickly. I think it's important, but it's something you guys probably already really talked about in high school quite a bit. But first, kind of the whole concept of looking at it as an ecological paradigm, and I think they say here that this was developed at Ohio State University, partially because that's where the author of the book is. Whoops. I don't know what happened there. Either way, looking at it as the triple bottom line. So looking at the whole idea, the concept of sustainability. We're looking at the economics, the environment, and the social issues all together. And we're going to try to apply the scientific method to all of this. So here are the steps of the scientific method. And what I'm saying, and the reason why this is plant science and why we place such an important emphasis on this, is how do we address a problem? Ideally, we want to do it through experimentation, research and experimentation. So first, we identify the problem and we make a hypothesis, an educated guess about that problem. Then we're going to test that hypothesis by doing experiments, or a lot of times they're studying experiments that have already been done, bodies of research. And then we're going to check and interpret the results of what our data says. And finally, report those results. And usually that happens in kind of a peer-reviewed kind of research realm. So the scientific method and these steps of the scientific method, I think, are really important to get a grasp on, just because that's how we approach addressing these challenges and issues, especially on the scientific front, maybe not so much on the policy and political front, but they can inform policy and politics. So we have an objective. We state that objective as a hypothesis, and we use research and experimentation to support that, either support or take away from that hypothesis. It's very important to do these in controlled experiments so we can get reliable information. The problem with these controlled experiments is that it removes a lot of other variables, and sometimes we can't necessarily see the whole picture. So the plant science is very important, but there are drawbacks to it as well. So here's just an example of a study trying to figure out how plants might grow in a compacted soil versus an uncompacted soil, regular soil. So we look at the type of soil as being the independent variable, doesn't change. The plant growth, it does change, is the dependent variable. And then the compacted soil would be the treatment. We would need the uncompacted soil, something that we didn't treat, to be the control, or what we compare it to, the check. In experimentation, we have to look at replication and randomization in order to remove any potential bias that we would have resulting from a lack of uniformity. So we might look at very random plots, or in this case, pots of soil, as a way of getting that randomization, but then also repeating that so that we can get reliable and kind of an average result. And of course, there's a whole lot of other variables. So the randomization is going to take into account that a lot of these plants might have different DNA. they might have mutations, even if they are clones and they have the same genetics, there might be mutations in that DNA. So randomization, we're gathering data from multiple places at the same time. Yeah, so again, randomization, replication, repeating the experiments, and then trying to arrive at some sort of conclusion from the data. In order to do that, we have to actually analyze that statistically. So kind of getting in math and science together there to arrive at some sort of percentage of probability and to actually support our conclusion. All right, so in interpreting that data, it is also important to describe in detail how we did that experiment, so that ideally the best experiment is something that can be repeated by future researchers, and they can either support your conclusion or maybe argue against it. Compare their results and methods to yours for it to be completely reliable. Often this ends up being reported in some sort of peer-reviewed scientific journal. And I think it's important for us to look at these sources as a way to maybe make some changes in the way we practice agriculture, and to try to meet some of these challenges that we have in ag. All right, so again, I've kind of went over time. I got, I think, somewhat impassioned there in the discussion. Who has questions, comments, or concerns? All right, well, I have a quiz from last week, kind of like an intro quiz, and that's mostly for you guys to sort of get used to my style there. I'm going to try to keep everything to mostly, 10 questions, 10 points apiece. So check that out. Take that. You got some extra time to do that. And then also the quiz from the lectures this week. And don't forget about the Where Our Food Comes From lab. I know it's a whole lot of stuff, isn't it? But they're not, nothing that is like a whole bunch of work, I don't think, anyway. Anybody? Questions, comments, concerns? All right. Well, y'all have a great day. Wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.